Hey there. Round of applause. Okay. So we are back. And in case you didn't notice, you don't need to adjust your screen. What you are seeing below, at least on my screen, what you're seeing in addition to the image of myself and Pastor Andrew is our love child, who is Pastor Will Smith of Fort Wayne, Indiana. I am Pastor Jeff, parts unknown, and then we have Pastor Andrew Gookin up in Rochester, New York. And both of them serve at Lutheran churches that have resurrection in the title. So, Will, is yours Church of the Resurrection? Because that's what Andrew's is, or is it just Resurrection Lutheran Church? Resurrection. Okay. All right. So the topic today that we are going to go over is baptism. And as we kind of were discussing and thinking of what to talk about today, baptism in a way kind of seems like something that we all just know and take for granted. It's just something that happens. Most Lutherans are actually even baptized before they have any recollection of being in church. So it's kind of like a foregone conclusion. But sometimes in ministry and sometimes in things in the church, the things that are just the way they are things that we probably should talk about because they're things that just kind of happen that we don't really understand why we do things the way we do them. So we are talking today about baptism. Okay, so something that we do that a few other non-Catholic denominations do, and I'm scaring Andrew already. Some of the things that we do that some other non-Catholic denominations do, but not all of them do, is we baptize infants. Okay, so all three of us have kids. Both of you.
That's not a question.
That's a fact. The question is this. I'm trying to remember. I think so. Both of you had your kids either presided yourself or had your kids baptized when they were infants, right? Like the typical Lutheran way.
Yes.
Yeah. Me too. So when we baptize infants, what is your understanding of why we do that and what that says about our theology and what that says about our relationship with God or how we believe God is acting, in the world? And I put that up for either one of you. Don't answer at the same time.
So the standard answer for that is that we put all the value on what God does in that circumstance. And so one of the reasons that we can come to the font with a child or a baby is that our being loved, our being redeemed, our being saved has nothing to do with our understanding or abilities, but rests wholly on God and God's abilities. So that that's the place that we come from when we're baptizing infants.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of fitting this week, if either of you have not started or haven't looked at the readings yet, obviously, I don't know if I think it's the second lesson from Acts chapter 2, I believe. If you're following the Revised Common Lectionary, talks about, or maybe it's the first lesson. I don't know. It's one of the lessons, I thought. If not, it was the reading for Tuesday from the daily lectionary. Either way.
That was it.
That was it. When I was going to daily lectionary, it was Acts chapter 2. And it's a story following Pentecost when Peter preaches and the crowd say to him, what do we have to do? And he says, repent and be baptized. So I completely agree with everything you said there, Will, which I think is good because that's what we were taught. And that's what we're supposed to say. But how does that then make sense with when do you ever find yourselves encountering people or even yourself thinking, yes, we know it's all God, but what do we have to do? Like, there's got to be something, we have to do as well. So how do you get into those conversations, with people if it gets to that point and they say, well, we know God does this, but obviously we're doing something as well. Andrew, how do you
Oh,
kind of encounter that? Yeah, because Will
so
answered first, so now it's your turn.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you asking? What do they have to do for what?
So like I've had people, and Will, I don't know if I've had people, if I were to say to them, if you're putting a percentage on who's doing what in baptism, it's
Oh,
like, even though people say, well, it's 100%, even though the answer is 100% God, 0% whoever's being baptized, or the pastor or anything, it's all God. I think for some people they've kind of hinted at, well, maybe it's 99.9% God, but there's something that I'm doing, whether it's like bringing myself and saying I want to do this, whether it's me bringing my child, there's still some responsibility, some part of the validity that rests with us. And what Will is saying, which I agree with, is no, it's not. It's God.
yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
but so how do you?
yeah.
Yeah, how do you respond to that?
No, so yeah, God is the actor in. God's the one taking action in that, and as we talk about, especially, well, yeah, for Lutherans, our two sacraments, communion and baptism. Baptism, you need to have the element, right? So you have water, you have the word, right? And you have God as the actor. So these are the things, that's that command, right? Go and baptize. So just that kind of, I think, foundational sacrament and essential requirements. But yeah, God is the actor. I could say that where there might be someone might come at it with the argument that so we have to do something is when we look at the baptismal liturgy, because it's like, well, you've come here and there's that responsibility, you ask of the parents, the sponsors, godparents, and then of course also the congregation. There's that whole idea that the baptism should be a part of the service, because you can get that argument of that idea that the people are also acting in that. But when it comes down to what happens, or what's happening with baptism, God is the one that's the actor. We, of course, cannot save ourselves, hence Christ on the cross, right? So, I've had that conversation as well with a lot of people. It's like, well, what do we have to do? And it's like, well, what we're doing is we're saying, we're making this commitment to do these things. And there's been several times, especially earlier in my ministry, where I'm just like, yeah, this is what you're doing, and you need to live up to that, and kind of coming off.
Which I'm sure has gone really well.
It has not sometimes, but yeah, especially in both sacraments, God is the one that's providing these things, and we're simply partaking of them. The difference here for me, I'm sure it's the same for you too. When you have a conversation with someone, be it like with parents saying, well, I want to have my child, or baptized, the baby obviously can't answer. But then I just read this thing that maybe babies can, but that's a side thing.
That's a complete side thing, yeah.
But as you have someone that's a little bit older, because of course we talk about our affirmation of baptism, confirmation. I found that it's been a much deeper discussion. It's like, why do you want to do this? It's interesting when you ask parents, well, why do you want to have your kid baptized? And I used to say that and then just wait. And it's been a while, but I would ask that question, and I'm like, and I don't say the wrong answer, but I say an answer that I'm going to say, okay, let's talk more about that. Let's dive deeper, is when they're like, well, that's just what you do. Right. Or isn't that what you do? Or, well, my parents want me to have my kid baptized. Right. Okay, well, let's talk about that, because why do you want to do that? Because you're saying these things,
Yeah.
You're making
Will,
these
is there Yeah. Well, is there a certain response that you, like if you were to ask that question? Because what Andrew gave is one of the responses I typically get. Why do you want to have your child baptized? Um, I probably get one of three responses or a mixture of all three. Um, but is there any additional ones in addition to what's kind of what you do, what's what you're supposed to do that you are typical answers you would get from some, from parents?
For the parents.
Yeah, if you're saying why do you want to have your child baptized?
Um, well, interestingly, I've never asked that.
Mm.
Well, it's because that's because you're a good pastor.
I,
But Andrew and I have.
no,
We're very
no,
skeptical. Why do you want to have this child baptized?
exactly. Do you want to do this? Yeah, no. For me, the way I start the conversation is, we want to be very clear and upfront that this isn't fire insurance.
Mm.
Okay, so that's kind of the second answer that I get sometimes. So when you say fire insurance, the implication is what? That they're doing it because
they want to make sure that their child will go to heaven someday.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that is the second response that I get. So it's what you do. We want them to go to heaven. So when you say it's not fire insurance, what kind of response does that get from people?
Very awkward chuckles.
Because that is what they're doing.
Because they want to laugh, but they know they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
Even though they have no idea who they're really talking to. And
yeah. If they did, they would have been laughing when they walked in. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So if you have, all right, it's what you do. It's, another typical response, like I said, if I get three or interwoven ones would be, it's key. I want them to go to heaven. And the third one, I want to say is the most, they're all valid. Because as a parent, did I do baptism because that's what we do as Christians? Yes. Do I want my kids to go to heaven? Yes. It's not necessarily how my theology applies to that. I do. Let me be very clear. I do
okay.
want you wavered for a second. But then the third one is kind of like this. We want to raise them in the church. We want them to have an upbringing. We want them to get these values and whatever. And this is kind of like that first step along that way. And so it seems like I don't know. So it is that gift. We've talked about it being something we receive. It's a gift. And at the same time, I think maybe for me, when the conversation goes towards what do I have to do, the response is more, my answer is more, what we're talking about is what is our response to baptism, not to the baptism itself. So how do we live out our baptism? And Andrew, I know we've talked about before, that sense of like our baptismal call, and so those are our approach is God does this, now we do these things. And so obviously we can't do that with infants, but when we're talking to, when we talk to the parents, it's all there in the liturgy, right? You're going to do this, 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 and this, bring them to the services, teach them the commandments, give them the Bible, all that stuff. And as Andrew pointed out, we even say to the congregation, will you help them? Do you promise to help do this? Have either of you ever called your congregation on that? Because I'll admit something here. I have not. And yet I have had my fair share of baptisms where the family does not return following the baptism. And I've very rarely, if ever, have had members of the congregation say, wait a second, we promised to help make sure this kid was here. Where are they? Can we help? Can we reach out to them? I mean, what's been your experience?
I've done that.
Have you?
Yep.
And how does that go? Just so I can know, because I've never done that.
I've done it a few times, and I wouldn't call them bad experiences or bad reactions. It was just kind of I want to say it was just kind of a realization, because there was, because we had people in the congregation that, were baptized there and had, gotten into trouble, and they were in difficult times in their life with some poor choices. And And people are like, well, we need to exclude them. And I said, but what about this? It's like, yeah, because I used it as a larger, and then I just use that as a larger context to just be like, we're here to support one another, just like, we're called to do for everyone. So
Right.
have we considered that? And, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, gosh, what a pastorly thing to do, like you would expect this from the pastor. But I really can say now, reflecting on that, I came at that, I don't think 100% as well, pastor, and I'm going to call people out. It's just, it was really a question for me as just a fellow, it really, in a sense, just a fellow child of God.
Yeah.
Just be like, what about this? Shouldn't we be supporting these people or see what we can do?
Yeah. Now, kind of going off that and saying people, all of us, but people have these situations where they do things and if we were in like a Baptist tradition or Pentecostal, they'd say like, well, they're backsliding or something along those lines. We don't use that kind of language. At least I don't think we do. But if someone were to approach you, for either of you, if someone were to approach you as they got older and said, and I've had this a couple of times, I would like to be rebaptized. I would
Mhm.
like to be baptized again, either because of things they'd done in their life and they kind of wanted that clean slate, um, or just because they've seen other people, they knew other people that got baptized again or got baptized as adults, and they wanted to have that experience, so for either of you, either or both of you, how do you approach it if and when if someone has asked you, I'm pretty sure I was baptized when I was an infant or when I was younger, but I would like to be baptized again. What is your response to that?
Well, I think that's I think adult baptism is something that we're encountering more and more in the world in which we live, because more and more people are coming to a place of faith later in life. Once they've been through college and are out on the other side and starting to settle down into a life, and they're trying to figure out what their life is and what they want it to be about. We're so that that assumption that people were baptized as children, I think, is a is one that we could have made 30 years ago and been right 99% of the time, and I don't think that we can today. But when I talk to people about baptism, Luther talks about returning to your baptism daily.
Mm-hmm.
That is it's not a one and done thing. It is it is something that we have to cling to. And so we don't rebaptize, but we do a remembrance of baptism.
Mm.
And when you tie that with personal confession, that can be a very powerful thing. Which, hey, by the way, we Lutherans, we have a process in place for personal confession.
Yeah. We did.
That was something that blew my mind away in seminary, was learning that one, that Luther was like, hey, yeah, we should totally keep doing private confession. In fact, I think that should be a sacrament. And
yeah. Hey, we should make the sign of the cross every day when we get up and do private confession.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. But I think that when people come with that problem in their life, if it's a question of not knowing if they were baptized, that's a different thing.
Right.
You do some digging, and if there's just no recollection of them ever having been baptized, then yeah, But your baptism is something that becomes a source of who you are.
Hmm.
And it is a point at which God is acting in your life, your whole life, from beginning to end, from before and long after, forever.
Right.
And so it's not something that ever leaves you. It's the image that I use is an anchor.
Hmm.
You can go anywhere, but that anchor will not move. You can do anything, but that anchor, it won't let you go. and it's a matter of coming back to it and seeing, in the waters of baptism, both who you really are and who God really is. It's
Yeah.
so.
That's yeah. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, sorry. The garbage truck was behind me, so I didn't hear some of that.
You were watching the squirrels out the window, were you?
Yeah.
I saw the drool just coming down just a little
Okay.
bit from your lip.
No. So
No.
yeah, no,
Because everything, just so you know, that was not a question that you want to go second to, because Will absolutely destroyed that. It just nailed it. So whatever you say now can only match it, but you're not going to exceed it. So I apologize, but I want to hear your thoughts.
No, yeah, no, I'm not like looking to exceed anything. No, I appreciate that analogy of an anchor, because I think that's true. And also Will brought up the baptism every day. I use that constantly. Especially when I preach about the you need to be born again. Oh, well, how well, what does that mean? Well, Luther, we're born again every day. We die and we rise every day in Christ, and it's the same with our baptism. For me, and I preach about it's that some might, and we might call it like a baptismal journey, but it's a faith journey. To jump back to something that Jeff, you said before, because I guess I haven't thought about it in quite a while. Why did I have my kids baptized? Well, honestly, one thing, it would look kind of strange if the pastor didn't have their kids baptized.
Right.
I think. But, the other thing is, that's what I come back to. Just as a Christian, as a Lutheran, I have my kids baptized because that was my commitment to say I am always going to be open and journey wherever that journey might take my children with their faith, just that faith journey. And I've been very honest with both my children about talking about that and seeing where they're at and just having that open conversation. And I think that's been really great. But I see that as part of my commitment. And so sometimes I don't go into great detail, but I'll share that with parents and then others, adults that are looking for baptism, looking to be baptized. Everything that Will said too about the, you had that question about rebaptism, and it's totally two different things. Someone comes to me and says, well, I was baptized, but I want to be rebaptized. You had said a clean slate. And I was like, well, that's rebaptism's not going to do that. It's not a one and done, but it's that consistency, that constant thing. But if someone's like, well, I'm not sure. Yeah, you do a little digging. Will said that, and I was thinking about, because the church I'm in is almost 100 years old. And, where the other places I've been in, other churches, they have the little big red book.
Yep.
In this room,
everything.
These two rooms over here, because I serve two churches, we have probably 30 of those, and they're filled. So we get these letters we got a letter from a 72-year-old who lives in Florida and is getting married. She's marrying a Catholic. Well, the Catholic Church requires all these dates. So guess what pastor got to do? Look through all these books. And I was thinking, all that to say, I was like, gosh, a lot of the churches I've been in don't really haven't kept records very well for that long.
Right.
But a lot of my Roman Catholic friends I talk to, they can, this is when I was baptized, this is when this happened. And I think that's something that's lost maybe for some Protestants. Um, I know that's totally a tangent, but
Well, at least it's better than talking about babies knowing that they're being baptized. So at least we can
hey,
go back on that path again. Um,
I was
please
reading
forward
this
me that story.
article.
I would like to see this article that you allegedly read. I'm going to Google that. But yeah, and I think part of going off both of what you said, I think was awesome for anybody who's watching this. That I also in that kind of that teaching moment say, you know, at least as far as I believe that where we come from as Lutherans is to say that doing a rebaptism, I don't want to say nullifies the first baptism because it can't, but in a way what we're saying is if someone is saying I need to be rebaptized, we're saying the first one didn't take. And going back to what, you know, Will's original answer of, you know, who's and Andrew saying who's acting in the baptism always takes. Like there's never a need for a do-over. Like God, it worked every time, you know, and what we do with that is always up in the air, even for us. But the actual baptism, the validity of the baptism is, yeah, especially for us. But the validity of the baptism, it's never like, well, we need to do that again because obviously your first baptism didn't work. You know, it's just not the case. And it's a really slippery slope, I think, to go down theologically. So then a question I have, because I know that I've done this and in my first call and it had horrible results. Have you ever had somebody come to you and ask for a baptism and you said, and there's probably more to the story because there's in mine, you said, yeah, maybe we should hold off on this. Maybe we need to get some things ironed out before we go ahead with the baptism. Have you ever done that? Or somebody says, can I get baptized? You're like, long as I'm here in the church, we can make a date work and, you know, we'll do it.
Yeah, I've never denied anyone baptism.
Have you, Will?
No, but especially if they're older, I ask to meet with them before. Mm-hmm. You know, I suppose in a situation where you know, and there, you know, we both have, well, all of us have been in situations where you're dealing with someone who's dying, mm-hmm. in which case it's just, you just do it. Right. There's no questions asked. Right. But, you know, I suppose in a situation where somebody was, you know, dealing with a lot of fear or shame or something like that, then that was just overwhelming them. Then I might have the conversation afterwards. Right. But yeah, usually, you know, so, well, something along, I mean, not necessarily let's iron this out, but, you know, I want to make sure that you understand what it is that you're doing before you do it. Right. Not because I think you're going to get something wrong, but because. Right. So I'm asking for a friend. Okay. This didn't definitely happen to me back in 2007. All right. If somebody, you know, so one of my fears, and I've because of the situation that happened to my friend, I've kind of gotten past it. But one of my fears originally was when parents bring their child to be baptized, if it's somebody I don't know, somebody I don't have any experience with, is okay, you know, this is what you're signing up for. These are the promises you're making. And having this feeling inside myself of like, yeah, they're not going to follow through on any of these. Like, I'm going to see them for the baptism, and then that's it until maybe confirmation, maybe till marriage, maybe till another kid gets baptized. And so that fear's kind of in there of like, you know, they're saying yes to all this stuff, but I don't think they're going to do it. Now, what would happen if somebody came to you and they actually admitted all of that to you? If you sat down with parents of an infant and the parents said, we have no intention of coming back. We really don't believe any of this stuff. It's really, we're doing it for grandma or grandpa. And, you know, we're really just doing it for them. We don't go to church. We don't believe any of this stuff. But we'd like to set up a time for a baptism. What would be your response to that? If it would still be, yeah, okay, let's do it.
This happened to a friend?
we'll call it a friend
You got it.
named me. A friend named me. Yes, this happened to. And someone just out and out. This was after like a 20-minute discussion about, okay, we can look at these dates, and they lived in a different area. We're going to travel back to their home church to have it done so grandma could be there. And I said, oh, I can hook you up with a pastor where you live. I went on the ELCA's website, found congregations in the area, just for you to be able to further your stuff. And as we got deeper in the conversation, the person said, all right, I have to tell you this. I don't believe any of this stuff. My husband doesn't believe any of it. We don't go to church. We don't plan on going to church. It's really just because my grandma wants this to happen. And so that's why we're doing it. My response to the person, which I think I would do differently now, but my response to the person was, well, you're making these promises. I understand why you want to do it for your grandma, but these are serious promises. And maybe we need to have a few more discussions about this, and really, so you fully understand what we're doing. And if need be, I can connect you with somebody closer to you so you can have in-person discussions about this. And the person said, okay, that makes sense. And then what ended up coming about was me receiving a call, not from the grandma, but from the dad of the individual, saying, hey, I heard you told my daughter you wouldn't baptize her child, which involved a lot of backpedaling on my part and a lot of explaining of that's not what I said. But that kind of stuck with me, that the narrative that went throughout the congregation was that I'd said, no, I won't baptize your child. But it was a serious thing. I had never thought that somebody would affirm my fears of, yeah, you don't really mean any of this, and actually come out and go, we don't believe this, but please do it for our baby, you know? So if that were to happen to you, how do you think you might respond to it?
My initial response to that would be, especially if I had that conversation and then the dad called, I said, well, no, I said, that's not what happened. But it sounds to me like what you need to do is have a family discussion about it. And they can be mad at me or whatever for that. I would never deny anyone baptism. That honestly, that's happened before, where they're like, well, we're just doing this for, for grandma or for grandpa or for my dad, so they're get off our back. And, we have a longer conversation about that. But, honestly, when it comes down to me, if I were to deny that, I kind of feel like it denies, especially as we talked about in the beginning here, it denies that God has any power to do those things. I mean, images like planting seeds and all that comes up. I mean,
Yeah.
You can have people that grow up in non-Christian homes, and they find faith later, and whatever that might be, but you don't know how God works. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing for me.
Yeah.
And
Will, how do you, yeah. Go ahead.
and I know some people disagree, but it's, if God's truly the actor, then, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
But there, Jeff, as much as I want to make you feel bad about yourself and
I already beat you to it. I beat you to it.
Affirm your complete inability as a pastor. The fact of the matter is that you didn't deny them baptism. You were looking to have a conversation, and having a conversation around what you're doing is never a bad thing. You didn't deny them baptism. They refused to have a conversation.
Yeah. You
weren't willing to just shut up and do your job.
Right.
And that's what you're supposed to do. I don't think that you would do any differently than Andrew and I, and that I would want them to understand why I was doing it. Just so that someday your kids may ask, why did you have me baptized? And you can say, well, we did it for grandma. But this is, what the pastor said, if they
Mm.
bother to listen.
Right.
But,
See, Will does bring intelligence to our
He
duo.
brings what's crazy about it is he brings an unexpectedly surprising level of intelligence to this conversation. I mean, I really didn't know it was going to happen, but he has lifted us notches above where we were before. Yeah, no, you have, and that's because you haven't seen all 17 episodes. That's why. That's why you say that. But
yeah, but
yeah,
it does. It really does come down to God does everything.
Yeah.
And that is an impossible thing to accept.
Yeah.
It really is, that God does everything. The only thing that we can ever do is to respond.
Yeah.
That's all we ever get to do. And somebody asked me to explain grace one time, and I really wrestled with it for a long time. And what I've boiled it down to is we don't have to, we get to. Mm-hmm. There's nothing we have to do. We don't have to do anything. You can have your baby baptized and never come back to church again. Now you're proving the point in the worst possible way. Mm-hmm. And you're really missing out on the vast gifts and wonders that come along with it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can do that,
Yeah. And I think what you said, well, there's something when both of you gave really good responses.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, even you, Andrew, is
Andrew,
that
I thought your answer was better than mine. I appreciate your guys's your willingness to ask those questions. I mean, and to say, it looks like this is a family conversation that needs to happen. I think that's really putting it back where it needed to be.
Yeah.
This was not about baptism. This was about placating grandma so that the kid could be in the inheritance. I mean, that was, or so that you can sit down at Thanksgiving and not have to have the same argument again. I mean,
of when is it going to happen? Yeah. And it really, and it was, and I appreciate both your comments of that was, my intention. I didn't come out and say, I'm not baptizing your baby. It was, let's do this. Let's get this set up. And then I'm more than happy to schedule a date. We can do this, and it just didn't go anywhere from there. I think, however, but based on responses, what you guys said, I think if I were doing it again, I think I would, have said, let's go. I really want to schedule a date. I really want this to happen. Mm-hmm. But I would also love to keep having conversations. Because of what you said, Andrew, of, since it is God acting and what is possible through God, that since that incident, since that situation, no one has ever said to me again so blatantly that they didn't believe, but they were still requesting that. But it's not that I haven't had those thoughts again. And each time I've decided to err on the side of grace, err on the side of what you were saying, Will, of we're doing this because this is what we profess as a body of faith. And whether you agree with it or not is, I don't want to say secondary, but we believe God is doing this, and it doesn't require your participation in it. I mean, almost in a way, there's benefits to it, but it's ultimately, this is what God is doing. And I think it would be interesting, and this would be for another time, but we don't really have those conversations, I don't think, around, communion. If somebody shows up for communion, especially anybody over the age of 10 to whatever, and they come up and put their hands out, none of us would go, well, what do you really believe about this, before we hand the wafer or the bread out? It just goes out, and I think I have to remind myself of that sometimes with baptism, that, someone comes like this for baptism, the water just gets, God says, all right, let's do this. And you kind of leave that, the after effects, you leave that kind of to, we're trusting that God's going to do something, out of this as well. So I think we've had good conversation. I know we actually have a hard time limit today because some of us are busier than others and have to get their hair cut after the show as opposed to before the episode. So what I
Wow.
told Will about is,
And as you can see, we know who that is.
it's not me. I am bald. And Will recently got his hair cut, so it's not me. I've shared different stories about memories of Andrew. Some of my favorite things about sharing memories about Andrew is that he doesn't remember what I'm saying until I start saying it. And then he goes, oh my gosh, yeah. So I told Will I was going to do one of those for him today. I'm actually going to do a different one than what I talked about prior to us hitting record. So it's actually it's a cleaner one. And it's one that I've preached on before as well. The other one, maybe I'll tell in another episode. It was very funny, but this one was actually this is another example of Will just sliding a nugget of inspiration in there where you're like, man, Will, where did you get that? Like, that's good stuff. So I remember where we went to seminary, Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, is now officially attached to Capital University, but time it was just next to it, wasn't official connection. But I remember taking a walk through the campus of Capital one day with Will, and I don't know if we were getting ready to go exercise or do something like that, but we were taking a walk and we were talking theology because we were seminary dorks, and we somehow got on to talking about belief and how do we believe. And Will said this, and it stuck with me, and I believe it, and I've preached on it before. So if you don't remember, Will, then allow me to give your words back to you, and hopefully they mean something. The conversation around belief, and Will said, you know what? I truly believe that once you have experienced Jesus, and truly experienced Jesus and experience the Holy Spirit, then you believe, because once you experience it, you can't turn from it. You know, once you see that truth and experience that love, you couldn't go anywhere else. And so for those who don't believe, that it's kind of the prayer and the hope that someday they get to have that same experience that you've had, that I've had, that you've had, because there's no way they could have experienced Jesus the way I've experienced Jesus and then choose not to believe. And I was like, wow, yeah, I really feel that. I believe all three of us, even though we have slightly different backstories, that all three of us at some point in our lives had that experience of Jesus where it was like hearts, minds, soul, whatever opened and like, wow, this is what it is. And once that happened, that was it. There were no other options. Like this was what existed for us. So I don't know if you remember saying that, Will. I don't know if you were in a blackout Will Ferrell, old school, kind of like just giving a brilliant response and you have no memory of it. But that has, you said it and it stuck with me, for God, what is it now? That was like almost 20 years ago that you said that. So do you have any recollection of that or no?
No, I obviously peaked in seminary, so it's
Oh boy.
been downhill ever since.
Oh boy, we gotta get the stroke machine out. Will, you're great. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
You actually were listening.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
There was no garbage truck going behind me, so I was able to hear you and actually pay attention. Oh man, yeah. So that was a good thing. I mean, do you, not having remembered that, I mean, do either of you have thoughts on former younger Will's statement?
I don't think that it's a mountaintop that you then are like, yeah, I can hold on to that forever. Your faith drags you through some really awful stuff.
Yep.
But it won't let go of you. You know, it's once you've
It's that
experienced
anchor.
that, there's, you can't shake it. You know, even when you want to, sometimes, you know, because it would just be easier. It would just
Yeah.
be easier
Amen.
not to believe. You know,
Yeah.
you can't. You know, you can pretend, but
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah. What about you, Blackbeard?
Yeah, I agree. It's not. Yeah, it's not like this. Yeah, your faith drag. It's there, and sometimes you feel like you've lost it, but it's still there. Because I mean, there's just lots of. I don't want to say horrors, but there's just lots of things that we can face. We do face. I mean, just everyone, and but the faith. Yeah, faith is never gone. It's there. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's just really hard to see or experience, but it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, and maybe I didn't, and saying Will's words didn't relate as well as I could have, but yeah, I don't want to say it's like a euphoric experience all the time, you know, it's mountaintop transfiguration at all times, but it's just, it's kind of once this has been experienced, it just stays with you forever. And it's kind of like, once you know this, it's hard to unknow it. Once you hear something, it's hard to unhear it. And but as you said, Will, and as you alluded to, Andrew, there's definitely been times where I've been like, screw you, God. I'm actually mad because I know you're there. But I wish this wasn't happening. And if I didn't think
Yeah.
you were there, I wouldn't be so mad. So yeah, that's but that was a it apparently was just another Tuesday for Will, back and whatever day that was. But for me, that was oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Knowing you, Jeff, it probably was a Tuesday.
It probably was. I probably remember what we were doing, and
You probably
yeah.
knew what you were wearing. I mean,
Yeah,
your memory baffles me.
it was a good discussion. It was a good discussion. So all right, well, so I want to say thank you. I don't want to call Will a guest, because guest implies that that you're not welcome to be here every week, which I would say we'd welcome you to be on time, but you're welcome to be here every week that we do this.
11:15, right?
10:45.
10:45. We waited a half hour for you.
What we've learned is Will can't read his email.
Oh, yeah. It was 11. It was 11:15 last week.
It was
Dork.
the week before. It was 11:15. But
Yeah,
this week was 10:45. Yeah.
Oh, well, see, yeah, you change it up on me. All right. Yeah, I'm not going to read your emails, Andrew. I mean, you have to tell me. If there's important information there, you need to tell me, because
put it in the subject line. That's where it has to go. That's the only thing he reads.
You know what's great? I did have it in the subject line, and I'm like, no, they'll read it.
No, they're not imbeciles.
It was in there, and then I'm like, no, they'll read the email, and I took it out. But see, that's all part of it. See, that's grace. That's forgiveness.
For you,
baptism,
undeserving,
clean
slate, making it rain grace all over.
Rain grace.
So thank you, Will, for agreeing to do this. And we could have been able to do this last week, but I messed up my schedule because I don't read emails either, and so I wasn't able to do it last week. I want to say thank you, and Will came up with the idea for baptism as well. I don't know if it helped you at all towards confirmation stuff, but it was I enjoyed the conversation. It's always good to talk about the things that we kind of gloss over at times, or that we teach about a lot, but I don't get to hear what other people say. So I can incorporate those things, or at least now know what I don't believe. It's one of those two. So, and Andrew, as always, I think he's applied hand sanitizer 4 times while we've been doing this. So I don't know if our words were dirty or what is happening in that office. but thank you as well. When I didn't get to do this last week, I will share this and get sensitive for a second before we go. Last Thursday evening, because that's when we record these, depending on wherever you watch them, my wife got home from work and I said, yeah, because I had to do this today with our kids, I didn't get to talk to Andrew. I said, Will was there too. And my wife was like, oh, but her first thing, if you know my wife, was they can't meet any other time. But then after that, she was like, well, I'm sorry. And I was like, yeah, I really do. I look forward to this. So Will, hopefully you'll be wanting to come back sometime, if not every time. And I thank you, Andrew, for setting this up. Will, what you don't know, and after he hits done recording, he will let this go through and then he'll send it off to us and we can share it with our people. But from Rochester, New York, get ready for that record button. From Rochester, New York, Church of the Resurrection, from Resurrection Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, from Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church in Parts Unknown, Ohio, we say God's blessings, and we'll see you again next time. Hit the button.